Welcome to the video on how to fly for beginners. This video is intended for people who have not flown on Microsoft Flight Simulator, or you have attempted but are having a hard time either taking off, cruising normally, or just landing. So stay tuned and I hope you enjoy. So in this video we're going to go over on how to take off, how to cruise, and how to land. So how to get your plane in the air, how to keep your plane in the air without much effort if possible, and then how to land it. Very basic introduction on how to fly. So before we get into any of that, let's look at our cockpit and understand some of these gauges and what they mean. So the most important three are the attitude, the speed or velocity meter, and the altitude meter. So these three meters are the most important for us. The rest is all on our controls and us seeing where we're going and landing the plane, so on and so forth. Other than these three, you'll have the throttle you're going to be controlling, which is basically your accelerator, I guess, your engine power, and besides that you're gonna need some flaps perhaps, that's in while you're in flight, and perhaps trim, but we'll go over those while we're flying. For now, all you need to worry about are these three things, and I'm gonna go over what they mean. So let's look at first the attitude. And this is attitude with double T, not with an L. And this basically is how your plane is in relationship to the Earth, I guess. So you see the line dividing the blue and the brown on the bottom. That is the horizon line. So if the center there is how your plane is relative to it, if you see that right now we're leveled off because this plane is just stopped in the runway. But if we would be flying, this line here, the orange line in the middle, could be pointing down if we're losing altitude and approaching the runway, for example, or just, losing altitude. But our nose is down, for example. That would be the orange thing in the brown. If we were going up, it would be in the blue. But basically this is where you're going towards, and this is probably the most important gauge, especially while you're flying and landing. Another very important gauge here, especially while we're landing, is the velocity or speed, and this usually has a green, a white, and a red. This airplane just has a green line and then a yellow and a red dash there. But this means that we're probably gonna always be at a nice speed. But it's important to tell how fast we're going so that we don't stall, for example. And stalling means we're falling off the sky, we have too little vertical speed, and not vertical speed, I mean normal speed, horizontal speed, and we're gaining too much vertical speed, so we're falling. And if we keep our speed up above a certain threshold, usually that means we're going to be not stalling, we're going to be flying. So this is another very important gauge, especially so that we can make a smooth landing. The other useful gauge, although the other two for me are more important, but this obviously has its place, it's the altitude gauge. And this you can read it like a clock. So the small one is in like thousands, for example, how many 1,000 feet you're above the ground, and the long one is in decimals. So for example, if we were reading this like a clock, and it was at the 2, the small one, and the big one was at the 5, we would be at 2,500, right? Right now we're just at like, I don't even know, like 110, something like that. But yeah, these are the 3 gauges you need to know. So no, you must be bored out of your mind, but yeah, we'll go flying soon. But what I recommend when you start is check out the controls and go do some tutorials. The flight training here is really helpful. It says 0% master, but I'm sure I've done some of these. For some reason it doesn't detect it. But yeah, either way, that will show you your controls. It'll tell you how to fly basically, and it goes from the small aircrafts to the bigger one. I also recommend you just take a flight like we're gonna do now. Choose a smaller aircraft like a Diamond or the Cessnas or something like that, but basically like something smaller to start off with is gonna be useful. Like the Cirrus is also a nice one. Don't go for the Boeings or you know what I mean. But yeah, like at the moment we're gonna go for a quick flight with the Cessna. So let's do a first little flight. You can pick whatever airport you feel like. I suggest some big airports to start off with because they are just going to be more spacious, especially with the small aircraft like this. It's going to be much easier. And I'm going to just pick up a random one here in Cambridge, I guess, and fly to this one close by. Let's see how. So if we set as arrival, all right, quick 8 minutes will be plenty of time to explain how to take off, how to cruise, and then how to land. So we're ready to fly. Let's go. So inside the cockpit here, all we're gonna do is apply some throttle, turn off the brake, and now we know all the gauges there, all the important ones at least, and we can just let it ride. You can start seeing we're gaining some speed, and it automatically will want to start flying, so the nose will rise, and we want to keep the nose at around 5 degrees. Out here we get a bit of a different view, and some different gauges as well. We can see the flaps and the trim there. But yeah, if we come back to the cockpit, you can see overhead, and also importantly down here we can see the controls, and we want to keep that 5 degrees up on the altitude, so we keep flying and gaining some speed, or some height I should say, altitude. But yeah, keep that attitude at the 5 degrees so that we can keep rising steady. We can also now think about cruising. Once we gain enough altitude, we'll think about cruising. So let's look at our trim here. Put it down to 0. You can see the line there on the trim. And trim, what it does is it controls our attitude, so kind of like it holds our throttle back or forward. Not throttle, I should say, fucking the stick, the yoke. That's it, the yoke. So it holds the yoke at a certain degree, and the trim over here is going to help us keep the plane at a certain attitude, up or down. So if we keep it at 0, we can see, okay, the plane is going up naturally. So for us to cruise, we're going to have to hold the yoke forward. So if we put some of the trim down, we can start see the plane will start putting the nose down without us having to hold onto the yoke. So it's gaining some nose again. We can correct it again. We we should be correcting with our yoke as well, so with our joystick or whatever you have to control it. But once you find that your nose is going up too much, you can put some trim so that it doesn't rise. So that it doesn't rise anymore. At the moment here in the map, I have a little map open on the right. You can see this is our airplane, and we're heading to that other airport here. And we can talk to the ATC. Mostly you can just ignore this. Doesn't really matter. The map is useful. You can bring it up in this menu over here, up on the top. Just hover up over that yellow arrow. But yeah, so now you know what the trim does, and basically the way to cruise is simply to take out some of that throttle, so some of your speed, or engine power I should say, down to like 80%, something of the sort, and then you just use the trim to make sure your nose is keeping steady to the horizon or just slightly above it. And yeah, you just let it go. Have a coffee, have some food, and that's it. But what I recommend the first time around, what you do is, yeah, you just do the tutorials. Once you finish them, go pick up a plane like a Cessna like this, or a Cirrus, or a Diamond, something like that. Choose two airports, or just the same airport, you know, do a turn around, come back to the same airport, and just do a takeoff, cruise a bit, like I was saying, try the trim, apply the trim up and down, see what you need, what it does first off, how it affects your airplane's nose, and then go for a landing. That's the beauty of the simulator. You don't need to be a trained pilot to just try a landing. Just boom, go for it. So the first thing of the first thing here of the landing is finding where that runway is. So if you don't have landing gear, you like in our case, our landing gear is already down. We don't need to worry about it. We should be thinking about landing gear right now. Also, some of the flaps. You can see we can put down the flaps of these things on our wings, and what they do is they reduce our speed heavily and makes us slow down and fall faster. And that means we can also just give it more throttle and control it a bit better. So on the approach here, what we're going to do is exactly that. Put the flaps down, reduce some of our throttle so that we reduce our speed, and then we're going to keep on adding some of that throttle, so some of that acceleration again, to keep our speed at a steady pace. So now we're just approaching. Keep an eye on the runway because we found it, right? That was the first step. And now we just keep straight at it and look to land towards the sort of middle quarter, more or less. And that's your first flight, doesn't really matter. As long as you land, you're great. That's why I was saying, like, choose some big airports. Like, this isn't even the biggest one, but we have a nice big runway here. And once you come down, you just start releasing that throttle, and you just land. If you're having a hard time, if you're coming in too fast, what you can do is you can do what's called a flare up, and you can basically pull just joystick back, give it a bit of speed so that you can stop your fall before you land, and then slowly glide onto the runway. but this was just very smooth, and then you can just leave onto the taxiway. That's all you need to do. Obviously, when I landed, I applied the brakes. In some aircraft you might need to put on some reverse throttle, but that's basically all you need to do. And we've done our first landing. It was that simple. Our first flight even. Took off, cruised a bit, and we landed. And that's basically it for our how to fly series, or tutorial I should say. Hope you enjoyed this video, and there's also some landing challenges you can watch that I've been doing. There's other content in the channel. Hope you enjoyed it, and see you next time. Hey, you're still watching? Yeah, you can check out my website at www.drawnbro.com. Check out my artwork, and new stuff will be coming out.